at our programs is to kind of step back and say, what is the main purpose of what we're trying to achieve, and establish some way of being able to check about whether or not our programs are achieving that. Not always easy and not always great. So let's start with effectiveness. And Marty and I again, go back a really long time, and I was chatting with him because many, many years ago, he did this, my definitive article on efficiency and equity and effectiveness in terms of transportation revenues and funding, which, of course, as I was putting this presentation together, I could not find in my personal library because I left it here on the West Coast before I went to Washington. So I'm hoping I don't bastardize it too much. I was pulling from some of the things I remembered from that. And in effectiveness, one of the things you think about there is you don't just spend money. You spend it to achieve certain things. So one measure is, are you achieving the policy goals the program that gets the most play. It's 30 years that we've been doing this. Roughly $1.5 to $2 billion a year often goes into this program. It is a discretionary program, and probably one of the most competitive programs within the federal government. At one point I heard there was more competition potentially for this program for anything except those in the Department of Defense. Don't know how to view that, as a positive or negative, but needless to say, lots of people want to participate, and there's not that many projects that get through. Our hope is that in investing in these new transit projects, we are helping to transform communities, improve quality of life, provide mobility options, etc. And in the past year, the Obama administration alone has gotten a record number of actual construction grants out on the street. However, there has been significant dissatisfaction with the process, not the least of which is with congressional members who make those $1.5 to $2 billion a year in terms of appropriations, that it's too complicated, it's too complex, and, although I can say here, way too slow. The general amount of time that a major New Starts project is in the pipeline can be 10 years or more. And I know, but when you think about it, this is going from kind of the planning stages all the way to construction with projects that can range in the hundreds of millions to now multi-billion dollars. But that said, because they're such high profile, there's an anxiety. People want to get them done, particularly in some term of office. So the whole notion of reform was pretty much at our doorstep. And in no uncertain terms, we were told we came in, you got to fix this. So we jumped in to look at reform. So what were kind of the opening considerations? One of the things that I came to appreciate as a political appointee myself is that the federal government is pretty unique on the executive branch side, that top leadership in every department is a political appointee, which means it shifts in the administration. So one of your challenges immediately, you start banding your opportunity to develop policy and make change within the windows of the administration. And that is a pretty short window within which to work. So one of the things to think about is, what can I get done? And how can I make it stick? How deep can I put the roots that it won't necessarily be easily overturned if there's a significant political shift after whatever? So, one of the clear things we want to articulate, what does the Obama administration want to accomplish with the New Starts program? A whole list here probably doesn't, surprise folks in terms of the breadth of it. I think one of the key focuses is the third one down. Sustainability and livability have not really been in the lexicon of the former administration very much, but a big focus for the Obama administration. And, the environment, disadvantaged populations, the impact that all of this has on economic development, which, of course, given the recession that, that's distinguished, frankly, the time that we've been in the White House at this point, all were reflected in kind of what we wanted out of this process. I've been throwing around the News Rights program. Let me just band it a little bit for you in terms of what's eligible. What we're talking about are transit projects that are over $250 million, which is a rather small bar when you think about these big projects, and are asking for New Start's funding as a contribution of the overall budget that's $75 million or more. If you fall below those thresholds, if you are under $250 million and are asking for less than $75 million, there is a part of the program called Small Starts, which in theory is supposed to be a more streamlined process for, quote, less complicated projects. The other part of this is that the Small Starts program right now is also focused not just on rail projects, but also on bus rapid transit, bus corridor projects, again, smaller projects that usually can get done more quickly, often cost less. Again, in terms of specific things we wanted to accomplish, I want to point to a couple of things that actually began to really drive where we were headed. And the second bullet in particular, there was an allegation that the current process was generating something the federal bureaucracy wanted to accomplish, not necessarily what a local community wanted to accomplish in terms of the project. And that the rules and regulations and all the steps you had to go through sort of dragged you toward this inevitable type of project that didn't necessarily match with what a community wanted to do. So being able to better respond somehow as part of this overall change and reform was important in that regard. That said, it was also very, very important that we did not relinquish, again, our fiscal responsibility to make sure that these dollars were spent on projects that would be successful in some, in terms of some way. If you build a project and no one's writing it, no one writes it, there's no worse damnation in terms of your critics. And so, again, it was very important that there was some defensible way of evaluating these projects in terms of their cost and benefits, and at the same time make sure that we could build in enough flexibility that the needs of particular communities could be accomplished. So kind of a tough thing to balance going in. So what did we do? We love acronyms. So let me throw one out here now, an NPRM. And I have to say, I didn't know what the heck that was. My gosh, I was, what is that? And anyway, it sounded to me like some small furry animal from Star Wars. But the point here is that nothing changes simply in D.C. And in order to change to come up with this reform, we have to go through this very laborious process called a notice of proposed rulemaking. What I wanted to emphasize, though, is we took a very unusual step. What's often allowed, so let me describe what that normally is. Normally what that means is that you work alone behind closed doors, come out with a new rule, put it in the Federal Register, which has microfiche print that is almost impossible to read. You have 60 days to comment on it, and then it happens. Not the most interactive, responsive, public engagement approach that could be thought of. What the process, though, does allow is for you to have something called an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, an ANPRM, much less strictured in terms of all the steps you have to follow. And we elected to do this in order to engage folks beyond the natural constituency of transit providers. We wanted to talk to housing and urban development. We wanted to work with the Environmental Protection Agency. We wanted to reach out to social equity, advocacy groups. There's been, as I'll use in one of my examples, a lot of criticism about whether these New Stars projects were taking into account the needs of transit-dependent and other communities. Local elected officials sometimes just sort of had no idea about what it really was. It was sort of like, you're a mayor, and you want to grow up, so you go get a rail project. I mean, that was kind of the thinking we often saw in the urban environment. And so we went, no, maybe what we should do is try to educate, the decision makers a little bit more upfront about what our objectives were and whether that was meeting things that they wanted to do. So we added roughly almost a year to the process to go through this outreach effort, and we got 2,000 pages of comments. I mean, it was crazy in terms of the response, but folks were really excited about the fact that we had not done it behind closed doors, that we had taken the extra time to talk to people. One of the other things to observe in this whole process with the NPRM is that we could only work within the existing law. There were a lot of changes that we wanted to do, but we would need congressional authorization to do it. And I'm sure that you've been discussing in this class the whole torturous process of the authorization of the federal transport bill and how it's not moving forward very quickly. But all that said, even though there were certain things, particularly in terms of streamlining the process we wanted to accomplish, that wasn't open to us. We had to work within the existing law. So that became something that we had to consider. So what did we hear? We heard a lot of interesting things from our outreach. Some of the stuff, it was confirming what we already assumed, but we heard some other things that were quite interesting as well. One of the first was, again, this idea that the process itself was biasing the type of project we did. And that, in particular, that the process was not dealing with economic development benefits of these projects, and we're not dealing with projects in more urbanized areas serving shorter trips. The other thing we heard over and over again was that it was just overly complex and extremely difficult to understand. And that it was heavily reliant on complex models that we argued over. I mean, part of the reason why it was 10 years in the pipeline, we'd spent 5 years arguing over modeling assumptions. I mean, it was just crazy. And at the end of the day, the question is, what benefit did that have in terms of the product that would come out of the other end? The other thing that we heard a lot about that was interesting was this notion that we were not, again, getting a good handle on the range of benefits that transit might produce, and that somehow had to be part of the process. And again, there was a lack of transparency. It was just so complicated, no one could figure out and justify the outcomes. So, again, hearing all of that, the range of what we wanted to do instead was to capture a wider range of the benefits, clearer measures, etc. But one of the things that we also heard from folks who liked the way we did things before, and we didn't quite expect to hear that, but it was pretty strong, from something called the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Oh, yeah, okay, moderating. When you go to Washington, D.C., you learn to respect and stay on the right side of the bed with them. Let's just say that. But their concern was if we moved too far away from a quantitative, defensible, analytical process, there would be too much judgmental, subjective elements coming in. So, heard it loud and clear. So our challenge was be responsive, be flexible, be responsive to our fiduciary elements, and keep it as quantitative as possible. Okay, that's fine. So let me talk, if any of you are interested, you can probably still go online to the Federal Register and see all the conversations. But let me talk about the one area that sort of brings it all together together in terms of the challenges of trying to achieve all of this and what we did. And it had to do with cost effectiveness. This is one of several statutory requirements in terms of what you have to evaluate. It was the most criticized element of existing process because under the prior administration, they developed a decision rule that essentially said you must get a medium cost-effectiveness rating to proceed through the evaluative process. So I use the analogy of the SAT. It would be as if, and I'm sure all of you remember this, very lots of smiles, that you had to get an SAT score of X, or otherwise your application was going nowhere. Didn't matter, your GPA, letters of recommendation, community service, all those things only mattered if you got an SAT score of X or above. That's what the cost effectiveness rule was doing. So though presumably all of the statutory factors would come into play, they created this pass-fail. What happened was project sponsors started to design to the test. They stepped away from looking at the whole of the process and were so consumed with getting a medium rating on cost effectiveness, they would do crazy things. Just saying, in this particular case was a bit crazy. City of Minneapolis had a light rail project, the Central Corridor. One of the things, as I'll explain with cost effectiveness, is driven by travel time savings. They ended up taking out 3 stations in the most transit-dependent communities on the line because the stops were close enough together, it dropped the speed enough that they fell under the cost effectiveness rating, so they decided not to build the stations. And you're like, really? But given the way our own thing was working, they were saying, we've got to pass this test. So it was like, whoa, this is just not happening. So what? This was within like the first few months that we got in there. So we worked with the secretary who basically disbanded the cost effectiveness decision rule in January of 2010 to say, this is not going to occur. But then we were left with, okay, now what do we do? So just really quickly, a couple of things. One of the other things I pointed out, and this is just real quick to say, we can't change the criteria. We have some control on the weight. So the first thing we did was to say, if they're all supposed to be equal, let's make them equal. So what we're proposing in terms of the new rule is to go ahead and make them really all equal so that you have a chance to not bias the decision based on one of the factors. The second thing we did was to tackle this whole notion of what cost effectiveness meant. I could give an hour lecture just on the second bullet of user benefits per passenger mile. Suffice to say, user benefits is a totally derived measure about 4 other factors, including parallel speeds on the highway, and it was just crazy. So one of the main things was to say, we just can't deal with that. It was extremely complicated, subject to a lot of back and forth, driven by fundamental assumptions, and we just couldn't deal with that. The other thing was that transit dependence is a very important part of these projects because that's a constituency you want to make sure is served by the new project, but it got tied up in, again, this whole user benefits analysis and the like. So what we proposed is to pull this back and say, we want to look at trips. Who's riding the system? And not just the new riders. That was the measure we had used, what was like 2 decades ago or so. But just to say, at the end of the day, how many people are on your system? And frankly, even if they're folks that were already on the system and now they're riding on the new extension, they're getting benefits too. So that all needs to be brought into there. Now, one of the more controversial, again, this is proposed, we've not yet done our final rule, but one of the things also to simplify issues was to say, or suggest that transit-dependent persons would be counted twice in terms of their mobility. And a lot of discussion back and forth now about what's that's accurate and what's based on, let it simple. So cost effectiveness revisited at this point to do with a couple of things. We've gotten rid of the complicated user benefit. We're using trips as the driving factor. We believe it's more measurable, both in terms of looking at current conditions where you can actually count the people, and also on forecasts. It's more understandable to the to the public and to public system makers. They know persons riding on their system. It definitely is addressing one of the perceived biases. Travel time savings favored suburban commuter systems that have long distances between stations because you saved time. Urbanized systems with shorter trips weren't picking that up. They were at a disadvantage in terms of that assumption. Total trips seems to kind of equal, at least in our view, equals everyone else. Larsa. The big debate, is it too simple? There are folks that believe, yes, Brian? I believe they are unlinked, so the number, but total trips are true. There are folks who, I think, rightly so say, but there are so many other things that could come into effect. Our basic point was, but if we don't have good data on all those other factors, and if we have a model that everyone's arguing about in terms of how it's constructed and basic assumptions, that's not getting us. We will go with the simpler view at this point, but jury's out on what will actually happen. So that is our situation with New Start. Let me talk about this. We have till 4:45. Okay, so I have 20 minutes, so we can have time for questions. 4:45. Okay, great. 4:40. I'm on schedule. Let's talk about another initiative, State of Good Repair, and this has to do with efficiency. Now, again, I'm kind of reconstructing some of the things I had in the past, but this gets to the notion of, does a program make your system work better? Fundamental. Is it a better system efficiency compared to what had happened prior to your putting your program in place? And this is what State of Good Repair is all about. Now, State of Good Repair was not an unknown concept before this team, Obama administration team, came into play. There was a biennial report to Congress, right by statute. In the tradition of a good bureaucracy, was periodic, 2-year lag time because we couldn't get the approvals done ahead. There was always 2 years behind in terms of the data. Hundreds and hundreds of pages that sat on the shelf. Yes. Trying to make that better, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what we were doing in terms of data repair. We, though, started, in fact, right before, we came to office, there was beginning, though, to be a sense that the state of the system was not in the shape it needed to be. There was an initial CEO panel on State of Good Repair noted here, and there was some reports kind of opening a dialogue of what needs to happen. But the big thing was that in April of 2009, Congress had required, in fact, when President Obama was Senator Obama, he was part of the crew. The big city operators, the legacy system, Chicago, New York, Boston, others, were stepping up and going, whoa, we have stuff that's falling apart here. And so there was a rail modernization study that was developed by FTA that went to Congress. Why that's important was very visible. It got beyond just our little cadre of bureaucratic agencies and standard reports to something going to the Congress. That report estimated there was a $50 billion shortfall on just the 7 major rail systems in the country, just on those. And that was an eye-opener. That got people sitting up going, oh man, this is bigger than we thought it was going to be. One of the things, though, that was quite interesting in that study was that we didn't have as good data as we thought we would in working with the transit operators. Some agencies, like Boston MBTA, for example, had excellent records about the conditions of the system. San Francisco Muni, worked with them in my old life, really bad data. I mean, they didn't even have an inventory of all their assets. So it was like, okay, this might be a problem in terms of developing some effective strategies here. We don't know where we're starting. So there was an immediate focus on transit asset management and why was it that we weren't getting good data from the agencies themselves. But then there was a second report to Congress, because $50 billion just wasn't big enough for people, to say, well, what about the rest of the country? You know, this is just the 7 biggest rail operators. What's the rest? So we did a follow-up report in July of 2010, and I will freely admit, we had to do some big-time extrapolations because of the lack of data. But where we could get good data on not only the other rail systems, but also on the bus systems, which carry the vast majority of people in this country, we estimated it was close to $80 billion. And that's a one-time, 2-day estimate of what's going on. There's a picture. I'm going to skip this. Here we go. So what this slide shows is that the backlog pretty much was, if you were going to come up to a state of good repair, and let me tell you, the state of good repair is not pristine. State of good repair is better than not dangerous to us. I mean, in essence, it's kind of what it takes to kind of get your services out on the street and pretty much know it won't break down. So this bar, if it was like brand spanking new, would be off the charts. But suffice to say, you know, what we were working with was that number for all systems. What these blue bars show is that irrespective of this backlog, every single year, just to keep up with where you are, let alone catch up where you need to be, there's a significant level of advancement that needs to happen. When you pull all of that together, the big thing we found out, we do not nearly have enough funds to deal with this problem. So we broke it down into 2 major initiatives. The first was to say, we have got to get our transit operators themselves to better track what they have and what the condition is. And it was pretty shocking for us to know that even with some of our most sophisticated systems, the lack of consistent information on inventory, life cycle, and condition, which is different than life cycle, like what shape is it. So that was the first effort, and we've been developing and working with transit operators around the country to try and develop, in some cases, an off-the-shelf tool to help folks be able literally to plug in values and begin to better track their systems. But this is where we moved away from just a place that often federal agencies stop, which is you do a report, you do your research, you say how big the problem is, you kind of get the tools going, and then you stop. What we did to try to make this resonate was put money behind the talk. And we created a brand new State of Good Repair funding program, a discretionary program, dedicated to State of Good Repair. Because one of the things that we found out, it was taking a while to change the perception that State of Good Repair was a policy priority for federal transit and should be for you. Everyone had been so much into the mindset of, give me my formula money and leave me alone, or let me play in the discretionary programming sandbox and give me a big, shiny new project where I can cut the ribbon. So we were trying to go, wait a minute, you need to care about this. And one of the things that Peter and I started to do in every single presentation we were on the road was say, State of Good Repair is important. And I'll underscore this by what turned out to be the sort of shot over the bow for us. Administrator Peter Rogoff made a presentation to the Boston Reserve Bank, May of 2010, where State of Good Repair was the focus, but he also said, and that might mean that we don't invest as much in new starts. And it was like, oh, this collective gasp. And he had this note, it's like, paint is cheap compared to a New Start project. Well, I was in San Francisco 2 weeks later to, at the time, receive an award from WPS, and I was regaled by this man who pushed me into a corner and said, "How can you abandon the New Start program?" I'm like, where the heck did you get that from? And it was just this whole notion that the fact that we were saying it was an investment priority was putting on its head everything that had just been the culture and tradition before. So in order to kind of keep everyone from flipping out, one of the things we did was, okay, we're acknowledging the problem, and we're going to come to the table with some money dedicated to helping you fix this problem. And that, it was amazing, the span of time. Suddenly everybody thought state of good repair was a good thing because now there were discretionary dollars that they could go out to make their case. Amazing, the difference in perception that we saw. But it was important, too, for folks to be able to go to their decision makers and say, gee, maybe we should be thinking about state of good repair as an important part of our portfolio. And if we catalyzed it because they could put an application in for money, I'm fine with that. It started to change the mindset, and that was really, really important. So let's end with the last major area, equity, where we've also made some huge, I hope very huge strides here. My definition here for equity, very broad encompassing, is the evaluation is, does the program affect the end users in a fair manner? A lot of times we look at things from the supply side. This is looking at things from the user side. And it's very important in a public policy we not forget that. So what we have done is we have had on the street, and we will be issuing, I hope, very shortly, final new circulars on Title VI and environmental justice. And the reason that we had to do that was very soon after, again, coming to our posts, there were a number of very specific issues. One with BART to the Oakland Airport connector. The Minneapolis example that we saw with deciding not to do the station that's just between Will and Wayne. What's going on here that Title VI and environmental justice just doesn't seem to be analyzed in the way that we think? And it wasn't that people didn't want to do it. What we found, quite frankly, was that largely because of a lack of clear and consistent direction from us, people they didn't know what to do. Our guidance was unclear. It was old. It was conflating these two concepts together, which was causing a lot of issues. And it was important that we had to step back and kind of start from scratch in terms of what do these two very important concepts under civil rights mean for public transit in terms of Title VI. And for environmental justice, what really is that? It's an executive order. It's not based on statute. It's not a regulation. But it's a very, very critical part of the evaluation of what your project should be trying to accomplish. So we said, let's start and make this clear. Again, just as a reminder, Title VI is from statute, is very specifically based in regulation, prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in federally funded programs and projects. Every agency needs to develop their own specific guidance of how to carry this out. But it is not an FTA regulation. It's a separate Title VI regulation administered by the Department of Justice. So what we had to do was think, okay, where are we falling down on this, and what do we do to make this much more clear for our grantees? And one of the basic situations was the fact that the steps that we were telling people to do weren't described and tied back to what the regulation requires. So the whole context of why do I have to do this analysis? Why do I have to compare, these, various elements weren't tied to anything. They were sort of floating without an anchor, so to speak. And so one of the things we did was to try in our revised circular to make that much more clear. And in this situation, what our grantees need to do is put together a Title VI program for their entire operations. It's not tied just to a specific project necessarily. It's more, you've got a set of regulations that at the LACMTA, as the San Francisco Muni, as the Chicago CTA, these are things you need to ensure that Title VI is being incorporated at various levels. The proposed requirements are long. They're actually, again, detailed very often on a regulatory basis. But one of the things, I want to point you to the bottom bullet. One of the things we didn't require in our guidance was that once you developed the Title VI program, that you actually took it to your board of directors for them to adopt. You just had to have it. You didn't necessarily have to have discussed it. I mean, the presumption, of course, is, well, once you have it, then you've integrated everything you do. But we've said, no. This is going to be really critical that when you adopt this Title VI program, you're not just sending it something that your staff and planning put together. You have taken it to your board of directors, and you have had them become aware of it and take action with respect to it. And that is something, in terms of our proposed change, that's been well received by, certainly by the civil rights community. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this except to say that one of the things about being a good policymaker is noting when you really screwed up. And this was an area where, frankly, we had not done a good job as the FTA in terms of explaining a very, very critical part of our Title VI analysis. What we require currently is that for our largest operators, everyone basically has to, every transit grantee, no matter how small, has to incorporate Title VI. However, for our largest, most complex systems that carry the most people, we require that we set a much higher bar for them in terms of the analytics that they need to do. In this particular case, we had very specific steps that if you were going to change your service, add new service, or modify or cut back existing service, or if you changed your fares at all, you have to go through a very specific comparative analysis of how it affects minority communities or minority individuals versus non-minority. We did not explain well at all what that analysis meant because, again, in the regulation, you have to do what's known as a disparate impact study, a very specific comparative test. We didn't explain that very well, so people were not doing it. So when they got challenged on it, it was a big issue. So one of the main things we needed to do, then the other thing that we did that just confused people more than helped, we had two options of how to do it. Now that's very helpful. You have a very complicated set of rules built on regulation, and then you give people options to customize it. Like, what were we thinking? So we had one that had all these steps, some of which were wrong. Then we had an option that said sort of make it up on your own. And that just didn't come out very well. So we've dispensed with the make it up on your own option. And we've clarified the regulatory requirements for the other. Now again, this is based on, this was the proposed changes we've taken out. In general, we've gotten good feedback on just the clarity alone has resonated with a lot of folks. So we're happy to have hopefully made changes there. Let me talk about environmental justice and then I'll conclude my remarks. The difference with environmental justice is because it's not a regulation and it's not based on really the impact on individuals. It's a direction to federal agencies. We, at the FTA, or federal highways, or the EPA, have the responsibility to make achieving environmental justice part of our mission. You can read it on your own. Focusing on disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects of our policies, programs, activities on minority populations and underscore low-income populations. Major distinction with Title VI. Minority populations are a protected class by law. Low-income populations are not. So there's a whole different set of ramifications legally in terms of compliance versus implementation of policy. And in the case of protected class, you have a legal responsibility to comply with the law. In the case of low-income populations, it is critically important as a service provider that you know what you're doing to impact those communities, but it does not carry the same weight in terms of whether you have actually complied with a federal law. So one of the things that made people really confused was thinking, well, if I do an environmental justice type analysis, that's going to suffice for Title VI. If I do a Title VI related analysis, it's going to suffice for environmental justice, and they don't, because they're different. They're related, but they are distinct. And so clarifying that was really important. One of the things we did for EJ, and I'll tell you, there is no policy for environmental justice anywhere. It doesn't exist. We had half a page buried in our Title VI circulars. We were completing it on our own. And so folks are going, okay, so I need to do environmental justice analysis. What do I do? We had no direction for it. So one of the things we outlined is a basic analytical framework of how to pull these together. Determine whether there are EJ populations, again, minority and low income, if they are present, to consider the potential effects, and then determine if they can be avoided, minimized, or mitigated, which again is drawn directly from the EO. There's three major focus areas that we want all of our transit operators to engage in. The first is public engagement of environmental justice communities in anything you do, early and often, is critical. What we've often seen in the past is that people wait till you're going to make a final decision before your board. You hold a public hearing. You invite a few social, community advocate groups to show up, and that's your outreach. And we're saying that's not enough. That it's really important that you think about different ways of engaging communities. It's not just, as you point out here, the formal meeting. It's having engaged dialogue. It's dealing with communities where English is not their first language. It's involving meetings in a community forum, not just your auditorium at your building, and a number of other things that need to be taken into account. And we've offered in our proposed guidance ways to do that. The third major area is transportation planning. Now, this is something that, as a planner, maybe I've had a bit of excessive input into this, but my sense is that transportation planning has not been the focal point for a lot of FTA-related policy. It's been driven largely about getting the money out, and we're trying to say, whoa, but there's a whole context within which those decisions must be made. As you all probably know, there's three major planning stages or arenas where EJ concerns need to be incorporated. There's state long-range plans by federal law, the regional metropolitan long-range plans, which I think is the primary place where a lot of these decisions need to happen, and transit infrastructure and service plans. You're going to, when you're going to build a new extension, you should be thinking about the broader ramifications of that in your road system well ahead of time. The planning process needs to address why should we invest in the transportation project? What are the goals? What are we trying to achieve? What projects best address those goals? There are choices, and very often those choices are driven by the fact there's not enough money, which is the how. How do you make these decisions given limited resources? That's a fundamental tenet of federally required transportation planning. And again, it could be a whole different thing, but most of our transit grantees have not engaged in that, and we're hoping that this is a way to bring them about. Very critical is that the environmental justice community needs to be at the planning table on the why, what, and the how, because their views may be very different than other stakeholders. And it's important that their views be considered with the other stakeholders, again, early and often. NEPA and environmental justice. Interestingly, this is environmental quality had very specific guidance for NEPA documents that required a chapter on impacts on environmental justice communities. Kind of stuff there, though. Not a lot of detail. Okay, so what do you do if you want to do an effective analysis? What we did was go back to what we've done is gone back to this basic analytical framework to say, when you do your NEPA analysis, these are the 3 tenets you need to work through. And we've offered some specific things after that. But one of the important things here, this is where environmental justice gets at the project level. We've been talking about, planning, which is the broad, decision scope is very important. But when you get to developing the specifics of a project, NEPA becomes the driving forum where all these considerations are brought to bear, and again, it's really important. So, concluding thoughts. One of the things that as you can imagine, this is just, I hope I've left you with anything else, making public transportation policy, I've come to appreciate, is really hard. I get out of bed sometimes going, okay, I need to make something that works in Lexington, Kentucky, Lexington, Massachusetts, and Lexington, North Carolina, and I didn't even know there was a Lexington in North Carolina. So, this is what I'm dealing with, every day. And it's humbling. It's very humbling to have to step back and say, how do I structure something that works with the incredible diversity of this country, the diversity of public opinion, the diversity of politics, the diversity of the demographics. It's just size. It's pretty critical. So one thing that you figure out within, going back to the observation I made about that little window. We have the current administration, that's what you got. You make strategic choices. You need to decide. You cannot do everything, and you cannot do big, massive overhauls. You don't have the time. So you select where you think you can make a difference, and you hone like a laser on where you might be able to make policy in those choices. The 3 things I mentioned here are really key. The New Starts program, State of Good Repair, and our whole civil rights, which extends beyond just Title VI. Frankly, I talked about that more, but those have been areas where we really had to say, if we leave anything, this is some areas where we want to make an input. So on small changes, though, small changes are important. Don't ignore the margins. This is something that I remember one of my very first theory lectures in planning school was the difference between incrementalism and transformational thought. And at the time, I was like, okay, incremental, that's just for bureaucracies. But if that's what you have to work with, make it work for you. And one of the things that I found here is that small changes can make a huge difference. Just, on the whole New Starts thing, just getting rid of that test was fundamental, that pass-fail decision rule. I think when the former administration put it in, they didn't think it was going to be a big deal, but it turned out to be like a really big deal, at least from our perspective, where we sit, not a very good one. Just changing that, I think, will be really important. Politics are a reality, make it work for you. One thing, again, that I've learned is that if Congress is unhappy and you don't sort of respond to it, they'll do it for you, and that's usually not really as good as you might want it. So with New Starts, the fact that we heard the message loud and clear, this isn't working for us, change it. It's like, okay. I didn't appreciate it as much as my boss, Peter Rogoff, who worked with the Senate Appropriations Committee in Transportation for 22 years. He knows the hill. And so it was pretty clear. You read the tea leaves and react in a way that's helpful. But at the end of the day, as a public servant, I try to always remember it's serving the public good that's going to be the test. That's how, when you look back, that's going to be how you're measured. And if you keep that in the forefront, with all the mistakes, with all the uncertainties, with all the less than opportune situations you have, you can make a difference. And it's been great, and it's been really exciting. So I hope I shared a little bit about what it's like to work in D.C., at least at the FTA, and thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take some
ask questions, make comments, elaborate.
Hi, Therese. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Flor Barajas, and I'm actually with Blaine, the Los Angeles Alliance for New Economy, and also one of former urban planning students here. And so we have the good fortune of working with Peter Rogoff as well as with Robert Carter, and really want to applaud FTA's leadership on approving the targeted hiring measures on the LA Metro construction careers and project labor agreement, which for most people in this room know there's a 30-10 plan. There's a whole bunch of transit investment that's happening in Los Angeles. But there was really no way of knowing how people were going to get onto those jobs that, were in economically disadvantaged areas, which is the focus, of our work. And so one, I wanted to applaud your leadership and also just to talk about, we didn't change policy there, as we were mentioning, but we did affect and, something with public good. And so I'm not sure if you're close to it, but I was wondering if you could share, because that's something that's very real and concrete, when most people think that the federal government can act.
I can talk about it in broad terms, and I want to use it as a way of talking about, I'm trying to think if I made a point. Take opportunity where you see it. And sometimes opportunity is where things aren't just clear as they might have been intended, and so, I have an opening here. So, you cannot, under federal law, hire based on geography, period. You just can't. And the thing, this is certainly for the Federal Transit Administration, I believe also for the Federal Highways. The thinking was another major tenet for federal dollars is fair and open competition. And the concern is that if you put too many restrictions, that it basically becomes funneling the money outside of a competitive process. However, talking about broader goals, it's also very much the fact that there's a desire with communities that want to provide opportunities, economic opportunities, for those communities that are least able to take advantage of them, to do so in a way, and particularly where you have a huge market to do that, so it's not like you're benefiting just by 10 individuals. So my broadest understanding of these details, and they're fairly complicated, is that we focused on income, and that you would be, in other words, if you have a policy that seeks to hire those that are in a more economically distressed situation, that wasn't prohibited. And so the fact that if you are going to achieve that, it probably stands to reason that the market for those will tend to be local. You can kind of get at what you're trying to achieve. Now, let me say this. This is one of those circumstances where it kind of got us to where we wanted to be. But it was hard and tough, and one of the things we're pursuing, if we can ever get authorization out of Congress, is a much more clear statement that allows for local hiring, just straight up, so that we're not working within the limits and vagueness of the current law, even though we took the opportunity where we saw it, but instead to say, okay, things are different, let's move on and move along.
Me? Hi, thanks so much for speaking to us. I really appreciate your discussion of environmental justice and Title VI. This was kind of ambiguous in my head, so that was really helpful. I'm the second year in the program, and currently there's a handful of us working on a project around Metro's procurement of rail cars for upcoming projects. And frankly, we're pretty concerned about Metro's recent award to a Japanese company that would need to benefit the region as much as other bidders, but most pressing could possibly be violating some Buy America requirements. So I guess my question is twofold. what's FTA's role in addressing those concerns? Do you have any just insights on that current situation? And more generally, what role does the FTA play in monitoring local procurement of vehicles and materials?
I cannot speak in detail on that specific case or customer being asked to evaluate. I can, though, talk about Buy America, which if there was another major strategic choice initiative within the window, it's that. On a legislative track, again, we have proposed, although how far that gets through the congressional debate and authorization, we don't know. The current rules for FTA, and again, Buy America is one of the most torturous things that every single department has a very different, requirement on it and whatnot. But for FTA, for a vehicle procurement, for example, it has to be assembled 100% in the United States, and 60% of the components need to be manufactured domestically. So that's the rule of the basics. Where we have, and again, this is where you can't make it more strict because that's what the law says, but what we have cracked down on are waivers to Buy America. Because what happens would be when someone wanted to say, wow, I really love this new low-floor vehicle from Belgium, and it only has 40%, but I want a waiver because no one in the United States needs it. We've cracked down much, much more hard in looking at that to say, you really got to prove that, and by the way, we'll help you look for someone that can do it. And in fact, maybe we can encourage a manufacturer to change their specs in order to meet the performance things you're looking like. So we've turned it around to say, at least even within law, we want to stop the waiver process from happening. And in fact, under ARA, the American Recovery Act, the big stimulus package that the president had, the rule was no waivers, period, don't even talk to us about it. And quite frankly, folks, what was interesting, that didn't stop people from spending money. Once they knew that there were going to be no waivers, they worked with it. So that was an indication to us that maybe there was some more, pressures we could have. The idea being we want American dollars to serve American workers. So that's the basic premise. What we're looking, again, hoping to find in authorization are some steps that would increase, for example, the manufacturing content requirements over time. But we'll need to see where that takes.
You talked about that window. I think that's pretty interesting. You have to set your hooks in, and you only have 4 to 8 years. But I want to know what that means on the flip side for the recipients of funding. Because there's new policy, there's new ideas coming through, is the response just to check out and just hit your checklist?
Wait it out.
Yeah, it's like, how do you get people to be on board with, let's say, meaningful public engagement, and not just filling out the checklist, or just, sort of compliance, but not with their hearts?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and
especially if there's a lot of turnover. It's like, just give us our money.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways to get at that, and it's a really good question. I think one of the things why we talk about baseline so much, when you're talking about whether someone has complied, the law is, did you meet the baseline? When you have discretionary programs of money, however, you can often require people to do more than the basic expectation. That's why that distinction of formula funds versus discretionary funds, this is a chance where you can really start getting people to step above the bar because you're making the competitive choice. Now, on something as fundamental as public engagement and environmental justice and whatever, part of it, quite frankly, is doing and committing to training and outreach of our grantees. I haven't really seen often where grantees don't want to do it. Sometimes they just don't know how. Frankly, the smaller ones are so stretched. I mean, it's one thing for, again, BART or Chicago or New York to bitch and moan about new things when they have 600 people in their operations department. Frankly, with some of our smaller things, they have 2 people. And so this is the hard part about national policy. You need to think about what can I do to assist folks recognizing their real resource limitations? And sometimes it's just having a webinar to walk them through, this is what you need to do, giving them simple tools. Again, one of the reasons we did the EJ Circular, it's one thing to say, you need good non-traditional public engagement. It's another to give them a whole set of walkthroughs and technical assistance to say, this is how you do it. It doesn't have to be hard. Here's some ideas that might work for your community. So there's a lot on us to motivate people to do it. And not easy, but at least in terms of when you can tie it to a funding grant and the discretionary competitive, you get people to change back. You can get them to change it. Yeah, sometimes. And
I was going to say, one or two more thoughts.
Thank you.
Sure.
What lessons do you think the agency has learned from the Administrative Recovery Act funds and initiative, both generally but also in terms of the Tiger program, and in allowing operators to use funding for operating assistance? Is there anything that's going to carry forward?
Okay, that was 4 questions in one, so let me break it down. A cat has 9 lives, well, Tiger has at least 4. We never saw that coming. I mean, one of the interesting things with the Recovery Act program was Tiger. It was very groundbreaking in that it forced the DOT to work out of its normal silos, or still use of S. It really was, you competed for the program sort of, again, on a set of merits that at least we hope to see as multimodal. Now, a couple of lessons learned. I think we were too ambitious on things like rigorous cost-benefit analysis, because the first round was no one had the data to do that, so bad CB, bad CB, bad CB, I mean, all the things. And then we just realized that we were expecting too much of these project sponsors. I mean, we were talking about a short-haul railroad in Mississippi. I mean, maybe not so much in terms of the big data bank on their benefits. On the other hand, I think the reason why we're doing Tiger 4 right now is that folks were beginning to see much less of a rote and maybe a more creative process about funding different kinds of projects. The tornado recovery proposal from Alabama for bike trails and, a new bus facility. I mean, if outside of a flexible Tiger program, we kind of go, oh my God, when we do this, we break it into 4 different pieces and it gets really complicated. So that's one thing. Other things from ARA, I'm very proud that FTA had the most stringent project delivery guidelines, and we met every single one of them in terms of obligating our money. I think we saw a lot of state of repair projects coming out of ARA, and the reason for that was because they had the deadlines they had to meet that were pretty short. Projects that were, again, repairing existing facilities did not have to go through didn't have to go through a full-blown environmental impact assessment, category exemptions. So what we saw was an investment actually in a lot of sort of fundamental nuts and bolts, which was really good. We may actually caught up with bus backlogs in that regard. So those are some of the things that we found.
We are pretty much at the time that there is a reception available, which means that you can have food and drink and
talk to